everyone. Thanks so much for joining us in this session, and I hope that you enjoyed the keynote and your sessions this morning. So I'm Kelly Hodgins, and I'm here in Montreal in Canada, which is the traditional and unceded territory of the Mohawk Nation. It's really good to be joining you from all over the places that you are from, and really nice to see your faces. So helping me today are my colleagues Coro Strandberg, who we're going to talk a little bit more with in a few moments, as well as James Stotch from the Institute for Community Prosperity at Mount Royal University, and Steve Dooley, Executive Director of the Surrey campus. You can see each of those folks with little asterisks in front of their names. And James and Steve are going to help me out with the breakout rooms a little bit further along in the program. So my colleagues Paula, Chad, and I run an initiative called Recode at the McConnell Foundation, a private family foundation in Montreal. We work across Canada. Our work focuses on supporting universities and colleges to increase their social impact and really to drive community well-being in the communities and regions, provinces in which they work. So to do this, we connect and we support and amplify the work of institutions who hold social purpose as their North Star and who see their role as critical drivers of community well-being. So we use a range of tactics, but with Coro's support and her direction, we've really been working on ways to help schools who want to go deep and embed social purpose into the DNA of their institutions. So specifically last year, we worked with a small cohort of schools who were revising their Strat plans. And we worked with them to develop ways in which they could really integrate and embed these concepts of social purpose and the vision of social impact deeply into these strategic plans, so that they would trickle down into the rest of the work and give sort of permission and agency to the staff who are guided by these plans. So what that resulted in is a set of guidelines that help institutions who are in the process of revising their Strat plans to do the same thing. We published those guidelines last autumn, and there was a really, really positive take-up and response to those. People found them really, really helpful, and they were utilizing them in a number of different ways. And they weren't just using them for their Strat plans. They were using these guidelines to inform academic plans, sustainability plans, even hiring decisions. And those guidelines were actually what we planned to share with you today. And I'm just going to give you sort of a look briefly at those. That's background. Okay, so this is what they look like. And I don't think you can click on them, but we can drop this into the chat. 1 second, or I will drop them into the chat in a moment. But this is what we plan to share with you today, and we plan to do a whole session on this, but then COVID hit. And we watched schools be forced into really rapid decision-making. So administrators, staff, faculty, everybody were forced to make decisions in the absence of process, normal process, under serious pressure, and with really little bandwidth. And so we wondered whether this new decision-making context might open us up to new, perhaps, risks. And risks specifically that the social lens might be left unapplied in some of those sort of really rapid and urgent decisions. So we were concerned or wondered if this serious external pressures and demands might lead to decisions being hastily made and choices that might actually move an institution back a step in terms of their priorities on social justice, progress towards environmental goals, equity, etc. So we paused for a second there, and Coro and I had a conversation, and we thought maybe there are ways that we could use these times and the rapid innovation that's happening and the quick decision making to make sure that smart decisions are still being made that cohere with decision makers and institutions like core values, and that those things aren't sidelined or left behind during these like high pressure times. So that's where we developed these strategic planning guidelines into a strategic decision-making tool. And the strategic decision-making tool is what, with your permission today, I'm going to focus this session on. So we're still going to share the guidelines with you. We're going to leave that link for you in the chat and allow you to download that and go with that for whatever purpose that serves you in the future. But what we really want to share with you and actually test with you today is this social impact decision-making tool. And so really this tool is made to guide decision makers at all levels, not just senior administrators, to apply very rapidly a social lens to their work. And it's designed to be quick and easy to use and yeah, user-friendly. So that's what we think, but we're going to test it with you today. Like really, it's new. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn it over to Coro in a moment. She's going to walk you through the tool a little bit. And then we're going to have a chance to go into some breakout rooms guided by James and Steve and me and Coro to share some conversations around decision making under pressure like this. So before I do that, I'm just going to introduce Coro, who is a close friend and a close partner of ours at Recode. She's been working with us for the last 2 to 3 years, supporting primarily VPs of admin and finance and their teams to embed social impact into their daily operations. And she's really been like critical in developing these guidelines with us, or for us, I should say. So Coro's other work focuses on helping industry and professional associations to become more sustainable, as well as helping boards of directors provide oversight on sustainability performance of their organizations and providing support to the private sector to embed social purpose into their operations. So Coro, I'm going to pass it over to you to familiarize everyone on the call here with the tool, and then we'll have a chance to really engage with it.
Excellent. Well, there is so much that is new about this period. There's COVID that has created a new context for all of us. And this is the first time this group of, what are we, 2, 4, 6, have ever done anything ever together, even with all of you. So this is all a meta experiment. I'm sure you folks can relate to that experience. Very excited to be part of this dialogue as we, in a just-in-time moment, pivoted the strategic planning guidelines into what you would think of as a strategic thinking tool, meaning to say this isn't the time really for thinking 3 years and 5 years out, which was what the strategic planning guidelines were designed for, but this is a time for, if you will, strategic thinking. So how can we turn the insights from the strategic planning guidelines tool into more of a just-in-time diagnostic or decision lens that can be leveraged and rippled into the decisions that you will be about to make? The point I just have said here now is reflected in the top right of the decision tool that you're seeing, so you don't have to read through all of that. But importantly, what is at hand here and what we are proposing is that this is a time, or we hope this can be a time, where more social impact can be achieved going forward. Not how to minimize or reduce the negative impacts, but how can we use this to leverage and scale social impact going forward. So that is the philosophy of this decision tool, and we think the philosophy also of this group here today. So the tool, as you'll see in a minute, is divided into 3 sections. So here's section 1, ambition level. And in the strategic planning guidelines, it was very interesting when we put that tool together. We were studying about 20 institutional strategic plans, and we found a difference in the sentiment in these strategic plans, and we think there's a difference in sentiment in the decisions that are being made. And so we invite you to think of decisions going forward. Are we trying to improve something, build, nurture, foster, which is sort of a kind of a 1.0 level impact of the decision, or are we trying to explore, create, seek, investigate, and anticipate? These are the words we saw in the underlying strategic plans. Or perhaps this is a time to champion, to excel, to renew, to engage. Or perhaps this could be a chance to inspire, promote, attract, lead, challenge, exceed. Optimally, this might be a chance and a time to transform. So is this a decision? Is this an investment? Is this a program that we're just launching now to react to COVID, where we could catalyze, spur, leverage, spark, maximize, and accelerate? And so we think that this is a continuum of impact, a continuum of motivation, and we would encourage people in their decision to look to see how they can use this time to inspire and transform going forward. And by the way, in most decisions, there is a we will do X, Y, Z. And so there's always a verb. And so these are the verbs at hand. Okay, so if we can go to the next page here, this is the second layer of thinking. We call this strategic thinking. What we introduce here, and again, all of these ideas are in the strategic planning guidelines. We've just focused them. We've created, I think we took an 8-page document and made it 3 pages. That's what we've done. So here, these are teaser questions that could be used in a meeting where decisions are being taken, or some decision you're about to make or one of your colleagues. What will future generations want to see from us? Can we be thinking long-term that way? Or what greater role do we believe our institution could play in the world? Can we use this decision as a chance to think about that? What could we accomplish if we looked long-term and if all obstacles were removed? Or perhaps what societal issues are being experienced by our stakeholders, and how can we help? Or how can we grow our institution by addressing these challenges? What human need could we try to meet? Is there an injustice or condition that we can address through this decision? I'm up on the top right now, how can our institution make a bigger difference? How do we affect change in our community or society? What influence do we have? How can we leverage it? And how can we adapt and influence any of the trends that are coming our way in a positive fashion, not just minimize them, but leverage and harness them positively? And how do we live out our purpose? And what behaviors do we want to be demonstrating by this decision? So these are sort of strategic thinking questions. And then there's another layer. And in your, on the third page, in your decision moments, you can pull from these 3 pages what might be most useful and salient to you or your leaders, and you could pick 3 or 4 of these questions and use them as repeating questions over and over. But this is more when we get into the decision lens, we refer to the language here of social infrastructure, which is the language of the original tool. You could think of it as social impact. But here we are asking folks to choose 1 or more of these 10 or so ideas below in their decisions. So for those institutions who have a philosophy of developing their community, number 1, how could this decision accelerate the development of our communities? Secondly, for those institutions for whom fostering community resilience is a priority, how can this decision build the community's capacity to recover from future risks and help it to adapt and thrive in future? For those institutions for whom cultural enrichment is a priority, how can we use this time to build community empowerment and capacity by leveraging our cultural assets? Others of you might be looking at, and anchor institutions would be an example of this for asset mobilization. How can we harness all of our assets in this time? What can we leverage to this decision to bring more of our assets to bear? Future generations, I mentioned this earlier. How will this decision improve social and planetary conditions for future generations? For those institutions for whom social innovation is the particular focus, how can this decision spur social innovation, experiential learning, and foster co-created solutions? And then number 7, how can we challenge the status quo? This is perhaps particularly relevant. In my world, people are not wanting to revert to the old way of doing things, but they want to use this as a time to challenge the status quo. So how can we challenge the status quo and build back better for the benefit of all through this particular decision? So this might be a good one for those of you who want to use this decision time to really be transformational in society. And so a few more on the next page over. Lots of questions here. So the idea is that you would go through these 13 and in your teams decide those that are most relevant to you and use them in a repeated context. So Perhaps this is a time to really bear down on the climate emergency. So why not take this question into all of our decisions? How could we hasten the decarbonization of society in this decision? What climate lens can we bring to this? Or perhaps we want to look at the question around global citizens, because we are all becoming global citizens through this global pandemic. So how can this be a transformational opportunity to leverage the global citizenship amongst our students and others that we engage? And equally, number 10, our alumni and our donors, is this a chance to engage them more fulsomely to become global citizens, and how can we leverage them in this decision? For those of you who are really accelerating your leveraging of technology, and all of you are, this is a powerful time to think about the role of technology going forward. And is there a new, by using these new technologies, how can we leverage them for social good going forward? What are other technologies, 3D printing, AI, robotics, big data? All of your campuses are investing in technologies. How can they be leveraged going forward? And of course, diversity and inclusion, Indigenous reconciliation. How can we use this decision moment to advance these priorities? So I think I've gone through it all. It's a lot to take in. All of these ideas are in the longer strategic planning guidelines. So you may want, if your institution is in any case enhancing or updating its strategic plan over the next 3-6 months or even next year, most will be, I suspect, because your strategic plans are a bit out of date now with COVID. So you can revert to the longer form strategic planning guidelines if you wish on guidelines. But again, this is a strategic thinking tool, and I'll leave it now with Kelly to take some of your questions before we go into breakouts.
Great, thanks, Coro. Just at this moment, we are going to just take any clarifying questions on the tool itself, which can be actually directed to Coro or myself to answer for you just for a couple of minutes. And then what we're going to do is go into a breakout. And what we're going to ask you is to think about a recent decision at your institution, probably as a result of COVID, ideally, where social impact was a key priority guiding the outcome. So most of you, it might take a minute to think of an idea, and you don't need to come up with one if you don't have one. But James and Coro and me and Steve are going to share some from our experiences, and hopefully that'll prime you to think along those lines. So just before we do that, do you have any questions of clarification on the tool itself? Okay. Great. So what I am going to do, so here's what we're looking at. Okay, this is kind of a bulky screen here. Basically, the question again is just to say, like, a recent decision at your institution where really, like, you were holding a social purpose or social intention as a key priority guiding the outcome. So thinking about some of the themes that Coro just raised through this tool. So if you're able to, in your small breakout groups, share sort of a story about what was that decision, how it perhaps came to be, and what is the social impact, or what was the intended social impact of that. You don't necessarily need to know if it was reflected in the toolkit or not. We can do that work behind the scenes. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to stop sharing for a moment and go grab the links for you so that you can actually open up the tool on your own screen, so you have it in your own browser. 1 second, bear with me. Okay, so if you just look in the chat there, you can open up the tool yourself on your own computer. And just as you do that, be thinking of perhaps an example you'd like to share in your own breakout. And then when Dustin's ready, he's going to split you up into 4 different groups with one of us as facilitators. And we'll come back in about 12 or 13 minutes to share it back as a group. Hi, everyone. Welcome back. I hope that you had some interesting conversations in there and had some learning from one another. And I always feel like the ending of a breakout room is so rude. It's like you have 1 minute left and you're trying to struggle to finish your thought, and then it cuts you off and boots you back. But thank you for all coming back. Wondering if we can hear just for a few moments here before we get to our next question, and I'm going to push you back into breakout groups for one final question before we close out the session. Wondering if there were any highlights that we could share here for the rest of the group, some aha moments or some some really interesting examples. Perhaps facilitators, Steve, Coro, James, perhaps you might have some highlights to share from the discussions that took place in your breakout.
Well, Kelly, it's Steve here. Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
So unfortunately, for about 8 of the 10 minutes, I couldn't hear anything. And so I would like to deputize my new good friend, Paul, who we were kind of doing hand signals back and forth. And anybody else in our group who would like to share what you guys were talking about that I missed.
Okay. Thanks, Paul.
Yeah, I think we maybe didn't speak directly to the question as much as I think a number of us were reflecting on how we're at moments in our own institutions, strategic moments, or we have been in terms of the longer term strategic planning opportunities and thinking about, so this is a timely session as we have been thinking about ways of embedding social purpose more broadly within our institutions. But then of course, yeah, everything has changed rather quickly too. And so I think we're eager to be thinking in more tactical or shorter term ways as well. I don't know if anyone else in the group wants to add that, but it was nice. We basically had a chance to get a better sense of each other's contexts, and that was good.
Mm-hmm. That is what I definitely like about the breakout rooms. James?
Yeah, so we had a couple of examples at very different scales. One at the University of Washington, just an initiative out of the Provost's office that really was a call for research proposals to mitigate the impacts of COVID, and they've been swamped with proposals from different parts of campus on that. So that's an example of a kind of coordinated whole of campus effort. And then there was another one. The comment was made, like a lot of the responses post-COVID are very nimble, fine-grained. A department, a faculty or a unit on campus, kind of just having to kind of fly by the seat of their pants and improvise. And so a really interesting example came out of the University of Windsor, looking at the engineering faculty who are used to kind of planning and sort of big picture efforts, very careful design, and they turned into a very kind of empathetic, nimble, kind of really student focused role, and engineers not always necessarily thinking of social impact, but in this case, really concerned about the welfare of students, in particular international students who were stuck in many ways. And the imperative to close down residences meant, well, where are these international students going to stay unless we keep residences open? How are they going to get food? All those things. So there are many different fine-grained responses to that were surfacing, but all very improvised and not a kind of based on top-down big campus-wide planning. So lots of interesting examples surfaced.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Really interesting, yeah. So, yeah, and I think we're hearing sort of at both levels the need for both. The strategic planning guidelines is, a 10-page big document that schools have been using to really like go through and guide them through the big long-term projects. And then there's the tool that's supposed to help with the short-term kind of decisions, like to what you're referring to there. So I have linked the Strat Plan guideline, like the 10-page doc in the chat as well. And maybe I'll just put the tool right against it as well. Here's the shorter tool. So I think just in hearing from and in reflecting on the conversations that you've had in your breakout rooms and having a chance to open up this tool that I just linked here and that we're talking about in the session today, I'm just wondering if perhaps, and maybe it's too soon because you're not really familiar with the tool yet, but I'm curious to know what kind of resonates for you about the tool? What do we think about it? What could make it more useful and relevant? Like, to really get to the point, like, is this going to be helpful to you or not? Is the question that we're really interested in. Like, we did hear from the big 10-page strat planning document that people dug into it and really found it useful. Now this shorter one, it's brand new, brand new. We're wondering whether it is useful to folks now and in future crises, or in future sort of emergency times, to help make and guide decisions well. So that's the question that we really want to pose to you as we move you into the next breakout discussion, just to really engage with the utility, really, of this tool, and provide us some feedback on where it might serve you. And Coro, yep.
Yeah, just before we go into the breakout, I feel called to just share 1 or 2 points from my breakout group that might help some contextual questions here for this group, for the next breakout group. What was being said was some reference to that this is a time of recalibration, and that the tool itself, while it can help in an emergency decision, it might become useful as folks start to pivot and recalibrate their efforts and identify priorities going forward, a bit on the more post-COVID side of things. And the other thought that was being shared is that while the tool is has some utility, how do we get it into decision tables where we are when we are not there? Decisions are being made, they don't always take social impact into account. We're screen sharing. So how can people who get exposed to the tool insert it into decisions where they're not present? So this came up.
Yeah. Okay, that is really helpful. Extra sort of context for setting up this conversation. So with that, I'm gonna ask Dustin to push us back into the same groups again, just to reflect on that. Any sort of final thoughts on the tool, and how it might serve you or your colleagues going forwards. Okay, welcome back, everybody. Okay, that was incredibly helpful in our breakout room. I'm not sure about anybody else. I mean, some high-level things from our room were that it was actually still too bulky for emergency, urgent kind of decision making. Too much information, too many lenses actually, which is really interesting because we had been already hearing like, oh, well, what about the SDGs, or what about sort of an empathy lens? Like, I don't really see those necessarily articulated in there. And so we'd been getting the sense that maybe it had to be bigger. But what I heard very clearly from my group was that, no, it needs to be smaller, but this tool is actually very helpful in other ways, in actually making sense of the decisions that we're making in terms of like a retrospective on the things that are happening so rapidly right now, or helping us give us vocabulary for some of the decisions that we are making, or even for employing our students with, student entrepreneurs to utilize this tool. So I was hearing actually, or even in strategic planning. So hearing a lot of utility for it, but maybe not necessarily in the way that we imagined it. So very interesting, and we've been rapidly taking notes. Just to wrap up, I wanted to hear if there are any other sorts of high-level thoughts or feedback from either facilitators or the floor. We have just about 5 minutes left in the session, and I just wanted to have the opportunity to open it up to reflections.
Okay, well, I'll go quickly for our group, and if anybody wants to jump in, but the response was that at a quick glance, it was really good. It would be nice to have a few more examples, but like the lens of intentionality of it. And then Paul made really a good point that in his institution, they spent the last 5 years of energy doing foregrounding social purpose, getting it on the table, and it's kind of like, now what? They've exhausted, his words, brain power, kind of getting it on the table. So this might help in terms of paving the way for the now what as an institution. And that in that context, a lot of us really thought that the third section had a lot of value because it had specific questions. It was really problem focused and would enable institutions to move along. But I think we shared some of what you were saying too in your group, that right now with COVID, everybody's just trying to get through the crisis. It's hard to be intentional. As much as we'd like to be intentional, we're just trying to get from the day to day, and we don't know how long that's going to last.
Yeah.
And if I could jump in and share 2 or 3 points, because they may be useful for those in the session here today. We heard maybe 3 or 4 things. One is that institutions are, in any case, going to be updating their strategic plans, because the original one won't be relevant going forward. So this can be a lens in the strategic planning, and this could be a time for all of you to start to make inroads into that strategic planning, either with this short tool or with the longer version. So that was said. Also, for those who can't themselves influence decision making, could Ashoka or could McConnell take these materials to the professional associations and the trade associations where leaders get their insights. The third thing that was said was this could be a tool for faculty and staff to connect to their own purpose. And it's a resource for having workshops with a group of students. You know, where does this fit into where you're going in your career, and which one of these things might be part of your own personal purpose or your career purpose? And then substantially, something that's missing from the lens is just to use shorthand of community engagement. And it was suggested that the cover page of the tool could add the term connect and use it to frame questions around how do we bring different voices into our decisions, and finding ways to bring communities together in decision making in ways that we haven't in the past. So that was a missing section that could be addressed by leveraging this idea of connect.
Really good. Thank you, everybody. This was very helpful for us, but not just for us, but for us to be able to know how best to respond and support you and other folks on campuses across the post-secondary system. So that was the intention of today, and I really hope that in as much as it was valuable for us, it was also valuable for you. And I'm encouraged by the different roles that you represent to hear that it's resonating for you, because the original Strat plan document really felt like it was very specifically relevant to those really working on the revision of their Strat plans. Now this feels like it's resonating with a lot of you in many different ways, and you're bringing different creative ideas for how you could actually employ it or utilize it. So we are going to take your ideas back, revise again, and create version 2, and push it out and share it out, and please make use of it in whatever way you like. Thank you so much for joining today, and let you get off to enjoy the rest of the sessions.